Hello.
His hands found my waist as I pressed against the storage room door, my breath catching as his lips traced along my neck. The coffee shop was bustling just beyond that thin wall, but all I could focus on was the heat radiating from his body. The way his fingers gripped me like he'd been waiting for this moment as long as I had. "Are you sure about this?" he whispered against my ear, his voice rough with desire. I didn't answer with words. Instead, I pulled him closer, letting my body tell him everything he needed to know. Liked what you just heard? Hit that like button. And subscribe. I promise you won't want to miss what happens next. It started 3 weeks ago. Glenn was buried in his laptop again, fingers flying across the keyboard, lost in whatever coding project had consumed his life this month. I stood in our kitchen doorway watching him, my coffee mug growing cold in my hands. When was the last time he'd looked at me like that? With focus, with passion, with anything beyond the polite acknowledgement of a roommate? "I'm heading out for coffee," I announced, testing whether he'd even register my voice. Came his distracted response. His eyes never left the screen. The morning air carried the crisp bite of early autumn as I walked the 4 blocks to grind coffee on Hennepin Avenue. I discovered this place by accident 2 months ago when my usual chain was closed for renovations. What kept me coming back wasn't just the expertly crafted lattes, it was him. Aiden stood behind the espresso machine like he was conducting an orchestra, every movement deliberate and graceful. Dark hair that curled just slightly at his collar, forearms that flexed as he worked the steamer, and eyes that seemed to catch everything, including me, apparently. "The usual?" he asked when I approached the counter, already reaching for a cup. His smile was warm, genuine, the kind that made my stomach do things it hadn't done in years. "You remember," I said, surprised by how pleased I sounded. Hard to forget someone who orders a double-shot oat milk cortado at 8:15 a.m. every Tuesday and Thursday. His fingers brushed mine as he handed over the cup, the contact lasting just a heartbeat longer than necessary. "Heather, right?" The fact that he knew my name sent a flutter through my chest. "You've been paying attention. More than you know." He leaned slightly against the counter, lowering his voice. "You always look like you're carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders. Bad boss? Demanding job?" I laughed, short and bitter. "Try demanding husband who treats me like background noise in his own life." The words slipped out before I could stop them. Aiden's expression softened and I saw something shift in his eyes. Understanding, maybe sympathy, definitely interest. "That's his loss," he said quietly. "Some people don't know how to appreciate what they have." The way he said it, the way he looked at me when he said it, made heat bloom in my cheeks. I mumbled something about being late and fled, but his words followed, me home, echoing in my head for the rest of the day. The next Thursday, he had my drink ready before I reached the counter. "Rough morning?" Aiden asked, noting the tension in my shoulders. "Glenn's presentation is today. He's been up all night perfecting slides that were already perfect yesterday." I accepted the cortado gratefully. Sometimes I wonder if he even remembers. "I exist." Aiden's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Any man who doesn't make sure his woman knows she's the most important thing in his world doesn't deserve her." The boldness of his statement, the possessive way he said his woman, sent electricity down my spine. I found myself leaning closer, to the counter, drawn by the intensity in his dark eyes. "You speak from experience?" I asked, my voice softer than I intended. "I speak from want," he replied, his gaze never leaving mine. The words hung between us, loaded with possibility and danger. My wedding ring suddenly felt heavy on my finger, but I couldn't bring myself to step away. "Aiden," I started, but he shook his head. "I know you're married, Heather. I see the ring. But I also see the sadness in your eyes, the way you light up, when someone actually pays attention to you." He paused, seeming to weigh his next words carefully. "I'm not asking you to do anything you don't want to do. I'm just saying, you deserve better." A customer entered behind me, breaking the spell. I grabbed my coffee and left, but not before I caught the slip of paper he'd tucked under my cup. His phone number, written in careful handwriting, with a simple message, "When you're ready to feel alive again." That night, Glenn came home triumphant from his presentation success, barely acknowledging me beyond a distracted kiss on the cheek before disappearing into his home office. I stared at Aiden's number for an hour before finally deleting it from my phone, but I'd already memorized every digit. The following week, I found myself at grind every day instead of twice. Aiden and I fell into easy conversation about books, travel, dreams we'd tucked away in dusty corners of our hearts. He told me about his plans to open his own cafe someday, how he'd studied business but chose coffee because it let him connect with people. I found myself sharing things I hadn't spoken aloud in years, my abandoned writing aspirations, my growing feeling of invisibility in my own marriage, the woman I used to be before I became just Glenn's wife. "What would you write about?" Aiden. asked during a quiet Tuesday morning, his shift ending as the breakfast rush died down. I used to think about writing romance novels, I admitted, feeling foolish. But that was before I forgot what romance actually felt like. Something dangerous flickered in his eyes. Maybe you just need to remember. When he suggested we grab lunch together, just friends talking, he said, though we both knew it was more. I should have said no. Instead, I found myself walking beside him to a small bistro 6 blocks away, far enough that I wouldn't run into anyone I knew. Over sandwiches and stolen glances, the conversation grew more intimate. He told me about his last relationship, how it ended when he realized he was more invested in the idea of love than the actual woman. I found myself describing the early days with Glenn, when he used to leave little notes in my books and surprise me with weekend trips. What changed? Aiden asked gently. Life, I guess. Work got demanding, we bought the house, fell into routines. I picked at my salad, not meeting his eyes. Sometimes I think we're just going through the motions because it's easier than admitting we've grown apart. And what do you want, Heather? Not what's easy, not what's expected. What do you actually want? The question hung in the air between us. I looked up to find Aiden watching me with an intensity that made my breath catch. What did I want? I wanted to feel desired. I wanted someone to look at me like I was the most fascinating person in the room. I wanted to remember what it felt like to be touched with intention, with hunger. I want to feel alive again, I whispered. His hand moved across the small table, fingers brushing mine. Then feel alive. The touch was electric, sending warmth up my arm and straight to my core. I didn't pull away. Instead, I turned my palm up, letting our fingers intertwine properly. The simple contact felt more intimate than anything Glenn and I had shared in months. This is dangerous, I said, even as my thumb traced across his knuckles. The best things usually are. We sat like that for another 20 minutes, hands connected, talking about everything and nothing. When it was time to leave, Aiden walked me back toward Grind, but stopped at the alley beside the building. Heather, he said, turning to face me. The afternoon sun caught the gold flecks in his brown eyes, and I felt myself drowning in them. I need you to know something. I waited, my heart hammering against my ribs. I think about you. When I'm making coffee for other customers, when I'm closing up at night, when I wake up in the morning. His voice was low, honest. I think about what it would be like to touch you properly, to see you smile the way you did just now, but knowing I was the reason for it. My breath caught. Aiden, I'm not trying to pressure you. I just need you to know that if you ever want more than stolen conversations and careful touches, I'm here. He stepped closer, close enough that I could smell his cologne mixed with the faint scent of coffee beans. I'm here, and I want you more than I've wanted anything in a very long time. The confession hung between us like a bridge I could either cross or burn. Every rational part of my brain screamed that this was wrong, that I was married, that I should walk away and never come back. But the larger part, the part that had been starving for exactly this kind of attention, this kind of desire, wanted nothing more than to close the distance between us. I should go, I managed to say, though my feet stayed planted. You should, he agreed, but he didn't step back either. We stood there for a long moment, the tension crackling between us, like electricity before a storm. Finally, I forced myself to turn and walk away, but I could feel his eyes on me until I turned the corner. That night, Glenn worked late again. I lay in our king-sized bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every word of Aiden's confession. My body hummed with an energy I hadn't felt in years, a restless need that Glenn's perfunctory touches couldn't satisfy. I slipped my hand beneath the covers, closing my eyes and letting myself imagine different hands, a different mouth, different words whispered against my skin. When I climaxed, it was Aiden's name that almost escaped my lips. The guilt hit immediately after, but it was quickly followed by something else, a fierce, defiant hunger for more. The next morning, Glenn was already gone when I woke up, having left early for another important meeting. I dressed carefully, choosing a sundress that hugged my curves, taking extra time with my hair and makeup. If anyone asked, I was simply putting effort into my appearance for myself. But as I walked toward Grind, I knew exactly who I was hoping would notice. Aiden's eyes found me the moment I entered, and the way his gaze traveled down my body made heat pool low in my belly. The coffee shop was busier than usual, so we couldn't talk freely, but every interaction was charged with the weight of yesterday's conversation. When he handed me my cortado, his fingers lingered against mine longer than ever before. You look beautiful, he murmured, quiet enough that only I could hear. Thank you, I replied, my voice slightly breathless. I meant what I said yesterday, he continued, leaning slightly across the counter. All of it. Before I could respond, another customer approached. I found a small table in the corner and sat nursing my drink, stealing glances at Aiden as he worked. Every so often our eyes would meet, and the intensity of his gaze made my pulse quicken. When the morning rush finally died down, Aiden disappeared into the back room. A few minutes later, he emerged and casually walked past my table, dropping a folded napkin beside my cup before continuing to wipe down nearby surfaces. My hands trembled slightly as I unfolded the napkin. Written in his careful script were just 4 words: storage room, 5 minutes. I stared at the message, my heart racing. This was it, the moment of decision. I could crumple up the napkin, finish my coffee, and walk out of his life forever. Or I could take the leap that my body had been begging for since the moment I met him. 5 minutes felt like an eternity. I watched the second hand on the wall, clock, each tick echoing in my ears like a countdown. Other customers came and went, oblivious to the war being fought in my chest between duty and desire. At exactly 4 minutes and 30 seconds, I stood up. The storage room was tucked behind the main counter, accessible through a narrow hallway past the restrooms. My legs felt unsteady as I made my way there, every step carrying me further from the safety of my old life and closer to something unknown and terrifying and necessary. The door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open to find Aiden waiting, his back to me as he pretended to organize supplies on metal shelving. The space was small, cramped with boxes of coffee beans and paper cups, dimly lit by a single bulb overhead. "You came," he said without turning around, his voice thick with something that might have been relief. "I came," I confirmed, stepping inside and closing the door behind me with a soft click. He turned then, and the look in his eyes nearly undid me. Raw want mixed with tenderness, hunger tempered by patience. He didn't move toward me immediately, giving me one last chance to change my mind. "Heather," he said quietly. "Are you sure?" Instead of answering, I stepped forward, closing the distance between us. My hands found the front of his apron, fingers fumbling with the ties. He caught my hands in his, stilling them. "Look at me," he commanded softly. I raised my eyes to his. "I need to hear you say it." "I need to know this is what you want." "I want this," I whispered. "I want you." The words seemed to break whatever restraint he'd been holding onto. His hands cupped my face, thumbs tracing my cheekbones as he studied my features like he was memorizing them. "I've imagined this moment so many times," he murmured, "but you're even more beautiful than I dreamed." Then his lips were on mine, soft at first, tentative, before I responded by pressing closer and deepening the connection. The kiss was everything my starved soul had been craving, passionate, consuming, full of barely contained hunger. His hands tangled in my hair as I melted against him, finally understanding what it meant to be truly desired. When we broke apart, both breathing heavily, he rested his forehead against mine. "God, Heather, the things I want to do to you." "Then do them," I breathed, surprised by my own boldness. His eyes darkened, and suddenly I was pressed back against the door, his body caging me in. One hand braced beside my head while the other traced down my arm, leaving fire in its wake. When his fingers found the hem of my sundress, I didn't protest. Instead, I helped guide his hand higher, gasping when his palm finally made contact with the sensitive skin of my thigh. "You're trembling," he observed, his thumb drawing small circles against my skin. "It's been so long since someone touched me like this," I admitted, "like they actually wanted me." Something fierce flashed in his eyes. "I want you more than my next breath," he said, his hand traveling higher, fingers skimming the edge of my underwear. "I want to worship every inch of your body until you forget anyone else ever existed." His words sent liquid heat straight to my core. When his fingers finally found their target, I had to bite back a moan at the contact. He explored me slowly, thoroughly, reading every gasp and shiver like a roadmap to my pleasure. "So responsive," he murmured against my neck, his breath hot against my skin. "So perfect." The praise combined with his skilled touch was overwhelming. I buried my face in his shoulder to muffle the sounds escaping my throat, my hands gripping, his shirt like an anchor in the storm of sensation he was creating. "Let me hear you," he whispered. "I want to know exactly how I'm making you feel." His thumb found the spot that made me see stars, and I couldn't hold back the gasp that escaped. He smiled against my neck, clearly pleased by my reaction, and repeated the motion until I was shaking against him. "Aiden," I breathed, his name a prayer on my lips. "That's it," he encouraged, his movements becoming more focused, more intentional. "Let go, beautiful. Let me give you what you need." The tension that had been building inside me for weeks finally found its release, crashing over me in waves that left me gasping and clinging to him for support. He held me through it, whispering words of praise and encouragement until the tremors subsided. When I finally caught my breath, I found him watching me with an expression of pure satisfaction mixed with tender affection. "How do you feel?" he asked softly. "Alive," I answered honestly. I feel alive. He smiled and leaned down to kiss me again, this time slow and sweet. When we parted, reality began to creep back in. I was in a storage room with a man who wasn't my husband, having just experienced more pleasure than I'd felt in years. I should go, I said, though everything in me wanted to stay. I know, he replied, but he didn't step back immediately. Instead, he helped me smooth down my dress, his touch gentle and caring. Heather? Yes? This doesn't have to be the end. If you want more, if you need more, I'm here. I nodded, not trusting my voice to remain steady. He stepped aside, giving me space to compose myself before opening the door. I slipped out first, checking to make sure the coast was clear before making my way back through the coffee shop and out onto the street. The walk home felt surreal, like I was floating just above the sidewalk. My body still hummed with the afterglow of Aiden's touch, and I caught myself smiling at nothing. When was the last time I'd felt this satisfied, this utterly content? Glenn was still gone when I got home, which was probably for the best. I wasn't sure I could look him in the eye just yet, not with Aiden's touch still fresh on my skin. Instead, I ran a bath and sank into the hot water, letting myself relive every moment of what had just happened. By the time Glenn came home that evening, I had my game face back on. We shared dinner and made small talk about our respective days, the picture of domestic normalcy. But underneath the surface, I was changed. I felt it in the way I carried myself, in the secret smile that played at my lips when Glenn wasn't looking. That night, as Glenn fell asleep beside me, I stared at the ceiling and wondered what came next. I'd crossed a line I couldn't uncross, opened a door I wasn't sure I could close, and despite the guilt that gnawed at the edges of my consciousness, I found I didn't want to. The next morning brought a text from Aiden. Coffee's on me today, and every day if you'll let me. I stared at the message for a long time before typing back, see you at 8:15. When I arrived at Grind, Aiden's smile could have powered the entire building. He had my cortado ready as always, but this time when our fingers touched during the exchange, the contact felt different. Charged. Knowing. Sleep well? He asked, his voice low enough that only I could hear. Eventually, I replied, heat creeping up my neck. I couldn't stop thinking about yesterday, he admitted. About you, about how you felt, how you tasted. The bold words sent a thrill through me, even as I glanced around to make sure no one was listening. Aiden, I warned, though there was no real reproach in my voice. I know, but I needed you to know. He leaned closer, his scent enveloping me. I needed you to know that I'm already addicted. The confession sent heat pooling between my thighs, and I had to press them together to try to relieve the sudden ache. Aiden noticed the movement, his eyes darkening with satisfaction. You feel it too, he observed. The hunger. I could only nod, not trusting my voice. Good, he said simply, because I intend to feed it every chance I get. The promise in his voice made my knees weak. I found myself imagining all the ways he might keep that promise, all the places he might touch me, all the sounds I might make under his careful attention. I can see you thinking, he murmured, amusement dancing in his eyes. Care to share? Not here, I managed to say. Then where? The question hung between us, loaded with possibility. I knew what he was asking, knew what my answer would mean. Another line crossed, another step away from the life I'd known and toward something entirely new. My place, I heard myself say. Glenn has a conference call from 2 to 4. He'll be locked in his office. Aiden's smile was pure sin. Text me your address. I'll be there at 2:30. I left the coffee shop in a daze, my entire body thrumming with anticipation. The hours until 2:30 crawled by with painful slowness. I found myself checking my appearance constantly, changing clothes twice, cleaning the house even though it was already spotless. At 2:15, I heard Glenn's office door close and the familiar sound of his conference call beginning. At 2:25, I stationed myself by the front window, watching for Aiden's arrival. At exactly 2:30, a black Honda pulled up to the curb. I opened the door before he could knock, drinking in the sight of him. He'd changed from his work clothes into dark jeans and a button-down shirt that hugged his broad shoulders perfectly. In his hands was a single white rose. For you, he said simply, offering the flower. The gesture was so sweet, so romantic, that tears pricked at my eyes. When was the last time Glenn had brought me flowers? I couldn't remember. Thank you, I whispered, accepting the rose and stepping aside to let him in. He paused in my entryway, taking in the space that was so distinctly mine and Glenn's. I watched his expression carefully, looking for judgment or discomfort, but found only understanding. Nice place, he said sincerely. Thank you. Would you like something to drink? He shook his head, stepping closer to me. I didn't come here for coffee, Heather. The intensity in his voice made my breath catch. Without another word, he cupped my face in his hands and kissed me, deep and thorough and claiming. I melted into him, all the nervous energy of the day, transforming into pure need. When we broke apart, I was breathless and aching. Upstairs, I managed to say. He followed me up to the guest room. I couldn't bring myself to use the bedroom I shared with Glenn, despite everything. Aiden seemed to understand without explanation, closing the door behind us with deliberate care. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, casting everything in golden light. Aiden approached me slowly, his eyes never leaving mine as his hands found the buttons of my blouse. "Are you sure?" he asked one more time. "I've never been more sure of anything," I replied, and meant it. His smile was radiant as he resumed his task, revealing inch by inch of my skin to his hungry gaze. When my blouse fell to the floor, followed by my bra, he stepped back to look at me properly. "Perfect," he breathed. "Absolutely perfect." The reverence in his voice made me feel beautiful in a way I'd forgotten was possible. When he reached for me again, his touch was worship, his lips prayers against my skin. He took his time, mapping every curve and hollow, learning what made me gasp and what made me arch against him. By the time he finally joined our bodies together, I was beyond ready, beyond thinking, beyond anything but pure sensation and connection. He moved with me like we'd been lovers for years, reading my responses and adjusting his rhythm to drive me higher and higher. When release finally claimed me, it was with an intensity that left me sobbing his name, clinging to him like he was the only solid thing in a world gone liquid. He followed soon after, burying his face in my neck as his body shuddered against mine. Afterward, we lay tangled together, skin cooling in the afternoon air. I should have felt guilty, should have been consumed with regret. Instead, I felt peaceful for the first time in months. "What are you thinking?" Aiden asked softly, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on my arm. "That I wish we could stay like this forever," I admitted. "We can't," he said gently. "But we can have this. Whatever this becomes, however often we can steal these moments." I turned to look at him, studying his face in the golden light. "What are we doing, Aiden?" "We're living," he said simply. "We're choosing to feel instead of just existing." Before I could respond, the sound of Glenn's office door opening drifted up from downstairs. My eyes widened in panic, but Aiden remained, calm, already reaching for his clothes. "His call ended early," I whispered, scrambling to get dressed. "It's okay," Aiden assured me, pulling on his shirt with efficient movements. "I'll slip out the back while you go down and distract him." The practicality of his response suggested this wasn't his first clandestine affair, but I pushed that thought aside. We dressed quickly and quietly, sharing one last lingering kiss before I crept downstairs to greet my husband. "How was your call?" I asked Glenn, proud of how normal my voice sounded. "Productive," he replied, already heading back toward his office. "I've got another one in 10 minutes, so I'll be tied up for a while longer." "No problem," I said, relief flooding through me. "I'll just be reading." As Glenn disappeared back into his office, I heard the soft click of the back door closing. Aiden was gone, but the scent of his cologne still clung to my skin, and I could still feel the places where his hands had been. That evening, as Glenn and I shared our usual polite dinner conversation, I found myself studying his face. When had we stopped really seeing each other? When had we become strangers sharing a house and a bed? "You seem different tonight," Glenn observed, fork pausing midway to his mouth. My heart skipped a beat. Different how? I don't know. Lighter, maybe? More relaxed. He smiled, and for a moment I caught a glimpse of the man I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. "It's nice. You should take afternoon breaks more often." If only he knew what kind of break I'd taken. The irony of his comment wasn't lost on me, but I simply smiled and nodded. That night, as Glenn worked late in his office again, I lay in bed replaying every moment of the afternoon. My body still hummed with satisfaction, still craved Aiden's touch. I knew I should feel guilty, knew I should be planning to end things before they went any further. Instead, I found myself planning our next encounter. The next few weeks fell into a pattern. Coffee at Grind became coffee and conversation, which became stolen lunches, which became passionate afternoons whenever Glenn's schedule allowed. Each encounter was more intense than the last, Aiden learning my body with the dedication of a scholar and the passion of a lover. He never pressured me to leave Glenn, never demanded more than I could give. Instead, he seemed content to exist, in the stolen moments, to be the source of light and desire in my otherwise gray world. It was a dangerous game we were playing, but I found I couldn't stop. The guilt was always there, lurking at the edges of my happiness, but it was overshadowed by the sheer joy of feeling alive again. Aiden awakened parts of me I'd thought were dead, reminded me of the woman I used to be before I became lost in the shadow of my marriage. "You're glowing," my friend Sarah commented over lunch one afternoon. "New skincare routine?" I smiled mysteriously. Something like that. Well, whatever it is, keep it up. You look 10 years younger. If only she knew the secret to my transformation. Was a 27-year-old barista with magic hands and a wicked smile. As autumn deepened into winter, my relationship with Aiden deepened too. What had started as pure physical attraction had evolved into something more complex, more dangerous. I found myself looking forward to our conversations as much as our physical encounters, sharing dreams and fears I'd never voiced to anyone. Do you ever think about what would have happened if we'd met before? I asked one afternoon, curled against his chest in the guest room. Every day, he admitted. But then I remind myself that we met exactly when we were supposed to. You needed to remember who you are, and I needed to learn what it means to truly want someone. His words were both comforting and terrifying. Because somewhere along the way, what had started as an affair had become something much more dangerous. I was falling in love. The realization hit me like a physical blow one snowy December morning. I was watching Aiden make my cortado, the same routine we'd performed dozens of times, when he looked up and smiled. The warmth in his eyes, the genuine affection, the way he seemed to see straight through to my soul, it all crystallized in that moment. I loved him. The knowledge was thrilling and terrifying in equal measure. Because loving Aiden meant admitting that what Glenn and I had wasn't enough, might never have been enough. It meant acknowledging that I was living a lie, playing a role in a marriage that had died slowly, quietly, without either of us noticing. "You're quiet today," Aiden observed when I didn't immediately respond to his greeting. "Just thinking," I replied, accepting my drink with hands that trembled slightly. "About?" I looked into his eyes, seeing the concern there, the care. "About what comes next." He studied my face for a long moment. "What do you want to come next?" The question I'd been avoiding for months. What did I want? I wanted morning coffee with Aiden every day, not just Tuesdays and Thursdays. I wanted to fall asleep in his arms and wake up to his kisses. I wanted to build something real and lasting with him, not hide in shadows and stolen moments. But wanting and having were two very different things. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I just know I can't keep living in between like this forever." Aiden nodded slowly. "When you figure it out," he said quietly, "I'll be here." The promise in his voice nearly broke me, because I was starting to suspect I already knew what I wanted. I just wasn't sure I was brave enough to reach for it. As I walked home that morning, snow crunching under my feet, I made a decision. It was time to have the conversation I'd been avoiding for months. It was time to be honest, with Glenn, with myself, and with Aiden, about what I really wanted. The snow continued to fall as I approached my house, each flake a tiny frozen moment of possibility. Change was coming, whether I was ready or not. The only question was whether I'd have the courage to embrace it. What would you have done in my place? Would you have been brave enough to choose love over comfort, passion over security? Sometimes, the heart wants what it wants, no matter how complicated it makes our lives. Drop a comment and tell me your thoughts. I read every single one. And if this story stirred something in you, hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the notification bell. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. Until then, remember, life's too short to settle for anything less than extraordinary.
Bye.